By this point, many of you have already completed Final Fantasy VII Remake. Some of you have already achieved the Platinum Trophy, pretty much completing everything there is to do in the game, including all of the optional content, and are now looking to what's next. Well, back during November 2019, as part of a Square Enix official blog post, Tetsuya Nomura stated in that post that they have already begun working on the next part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and he didn't give any further details at that time. And of course, lots of folks, including those in the media, picked up on this and started writing about the fact that development for Part 2 was already ongoing, even though Part 1 had not yet been released. However, it is perhaps time to temper some expectations as to the current state of development of Part 2, because we have a little bit of clarification here thanks to the recent release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania in Japan as to what exactly might have been meant by Nomura's comments. Just before we get into the latest info, I want to give a shout out to Raven31985 and Marty McGee for becoming the latest channel member, so thank you very much for your support, and of course to everybody who supports my channel. And in terms of today's video, I would like to thank Audrey for becoming our resident translator over at Twitter in terms of this Ultimania stuff, so I'll leave a link to Audrey's Twitter channel in the comments down below. Now, speaking in the Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania, Naoki Hamaguchi, who is one of the game's co-directors, had this to say about the development state of Part 2. As translated into English, we are in the current stages of planning, so nothing is solid yet. And just to confirm that this discussion took place in March of this year, so this was still 4 months after Nomura's comments back in November 2019 on the Square blog. So according to Hamaguchi, at least as of March this year, the Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 still remains in the conceptual planning stage. Now, of course, no further details were given here in terms of how far along the planning stage the team have gone and what that means for the actual development of the title going forward, or in terms of the release itself and when that might be. Now, Nomura has also spoken on the release of Part 2, and he's said that there's no actual internal decision that's been made as of yet as to when that may be, but that various factors are going to determine it. Factors such as whether they focus for each subsequent part on smaller parts of the story but bring them out into greater detail, or whether they try and include more story. That's going to determine not only how many parts there are going to be in total, but also the delay between each of the releases of those parts. And we have already discussed some of those issues in recent videos, so I won't dwell on them again here. But what does all of this mean for the development of Part 2? Well, of course, we can only speculate right now, but for me, until we went through this Ultimania stuff, I was kind of under the impression that they were perhaps a little bit further along than where they are. So it sounds like the groundwork is still being laid out for Part 2. And, you know, they're making the decisions as to where they want the game to go, rather than it being in full active development. And I thought they had actually reached the full active development stage, but that's probably my own fault reading into things in ways that I shouldn't have done. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that Part 2 is still going to take many years to be released in the same way that Part 1 was, because whatever decisions they make for Part 2, they're still going to have developed a lot of the assets and what have you when making Part 1 that they're going to be able to reuse here. Now, I've previously made the prediction that I expect Part 2 to be released in 2022, and that is just a guess on my part, but I'm still going to hold to that. I'm not going to change it. It still seems to make sense to me with all of the data that we've received so far. And of course, we've got the current ongoing worldly situation with the pandemic, which is pretty much putting everything up into the air, and how exactly that's affecting the development of Final Fantasy VII Remake, we just cannot be sure one way or another here. But what do you guys think about this? How have you reacted to this revelation given in the Ultimania that Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 is still in the conceptual stages rather than full development? Has that surprised you? Did you expect the project to be a little bit further on by this point, or is that pretty much what you expected? I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts, so please do share those down below. And as always, thank you so much for checking out the video today. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I look forward to catching up with you all again soon.